This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Thank you to Campaign Sidekick for supporting this podcast, and you can help them by going to campaignsidekick.vote to find out how their best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. Our guest this week is Zan Campbell of South Carolina, and Zan and I actually got connected very recently because he's managing the state Senate special election campaign for a friend of mine named James Gallion. Now, Zan is a born and raised native of Columbia, South Carolina, and like myself, he actually got his start in politics very early, volunteering on his first campaigns at just 10 years old. He continued that in high school by competing nationally in speech and debate, and followed that by attending the University of South Carolina. Now, during that time, Zan actually entered Naval ROTC and began on his track to become a naval aviator. Throughout that, he kept engaged politically, and that involvement continued as he grew up. Following graduation, he was commissioned as a naval officer and spent 3.5 years flying for the Navy, eventually ending up on the M60 platform, the Seahawk. Post-Navy, Zan's life has revolved around his lifelong love of politics and film. When he's not managing campaigns, he's running Fell and Fair Productions, where he produces independent films, writes, and does costume design. And we'll link to his Instagram and some of his social media where you guys can see some of the great work he's done there as well. Through several successful campaigns, Zan has proven to be a rising star in the political side of the Palmetto State and is finding new ways to serve his country out of uniform. Zan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Raz.
Well, it's a pleasure. We recently got connected through James, and he instantly had credibility with me just because anybody with a 3-letter name that has a Z in it automatically has a special place in my heart. So I knew we needed to talk some more, and I appreciate you coming on this week. Let's start out by talking about your background, kind of where you came from, how you got involved politically, and what the last decade or so of your life has looked like.
Yeah, so I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. My dad is a pastor, and we really had no political affiliation whatsoever. But my mom is very involved in the community, and so when I was like 10 years old, I remember walking in parades for Congressman Joe Wilson of so famous for saying "you lie" to President Obama during the State of the Union. That came later, but so we'd walk in parades, hand out stickers, that sort of stuff. And even then, I remember I've always been a very competitive person, so I remember feeling like I was part of a winning team at the time, and I was hooked from then. And then after that, I kept my political involvement up. Even though my family moved a little bit, we got hooked right back in up in Anderson, South Carolina. And then I was actually at a program up at the United States Naval Academy, and I took a kind of a political science intro program for like a week up there, and I just loved it. So I knew that I wanted to have a political science major when I was in college. At the same time, my family's been a military family for ages and ages, so I knew I wanted to be in the military, and I ended up joining the Navy. I decided to become a helicopter pilot, and so wasn't able to be professionally involved in politics for a few years there. But while I was in college, I was able to page and work for our state senator, Kevin Bryant, and that got me involved in local politics. So when I got out of the Navy, I got back to Anderson and looked where I could hop back in, and thankfully for me, there was a Senate election, so I was able to work for Senator Bryant, who since then has become the lieutenant governor. So that's kind of how my political track is run.
That's pretty cool. So, starting out at 10, going through having the naval involvement, flying for a couple of years, getting to do some awesome stuff there, and then coming out, you managed a couple of Bryant Senate elections, right?
Yes, 2.
Gotcha. So tell me a little more about that, because he was an incumbent when you first started working for him, right?
That's correct. And I actually volunteered for his campaign in 2008 and then managed 2012 and 2016. And, it was interesting because he was an incumbent. He had been politically active for a while. He had been the chairman of the local Republican Party. And so he was very, very established. He kind of had the system down. He knew what he wanted to do. So it was kind of nice for somebody managing their first campaign because he had kind of paved all the road ahead of me. So it was more a matter of volunteer coordination and general organizing and stuff. But because of that, I was able to see how he worked. I was able to kind of learn from him. And he is just a real down-to-earth kind of person. He's a local pharmacy and owns his own business. So he just sits in the pharmacy all day, and people come in and discuss his problems. And I would the campaign office is at the pharmacy too, so I'd be there working and just being able to kind of listen to him communicate with folks. And it was just an amazing experience to be able to study under somebody like that.
That's pretty cool. So, going into that, let's talk a little more about kind of how that goes. Because you come out, you volunteered in 08, you're helping out, you're running things in 12. But you had never run a campaign before. So talk us through a little bit of that transition, kind of how you got into the swing of things and what some of those early lessons were that you learned there.
Yeah, so it's all about relationships. I mean, anything in politics is about relationships. And so one thing that I've always been involved in is, whether it was our local friends group or the different programs we had in speech or debate. I was a varsity swimmer, so I was captain of the swim team. So I've always been about building relationships, building organization, talking with people. And so if you learn how to be a good communicator, if you can get along with people, and you don't necessarily you don't have to know everything, but if you know where to find it, that's the key. So, or knowing the person that you can communicate with and they can help you out. So
Right.
That was really key in the first one was either knowing certain things or knowing where to find them. And of course, having Lieutenant Governor Bryant and Senator Bryant, working along with me was really great, because I could always go to him, and he had very low expectations. So that was. I had worked for 4 years in his office in Columbia, and so I had gotten to know him. I had gotten to know the district. I knew most of the folks that were politically active and involved. So it was just a matter of being willing to admit when I didn't know something, and then kind of going to him and saying, okay, I really don't know this at the last resort, because usually I was able to communicate with people and figure out the question before having to go to him. So.
Well, what you touched on there as far as knowing that district well, I mean, your longtime familiarity, having grown up there, and you having known that area and worked there, that as a campaign manager is an incredible asset, because you not only are able to shore up those relationships and build relationships in new areas, but you know who the people are, how they operate, the local culture. And in some cases, when you have campaign managers coming in from out of state or out of area, that there's something lost in translation there. And I know that with you working in the same Senate district, helping with James's election, that's got to be an incredible asset you bring to the table for him and other people you work with in that area.
It really is. And, knowing everything from the best place to put signs down to, where people commonly go to eat breakfast, and just being there. There's a one local restaurant where probably half of Anderson goes at least once a week. And so just sitting in there, you can shake 50 hands just having lunch. So, it's knowing that networking, knowing what the culture values, the local, cultural hotspots and what's important and what they value is really key, because you can be the smartest person or the most, the biggest people person ever. But you walk into a place that you don't know, or you're not willing to learn the character of the people, then you're just going to have an instant disconnect that's very hard to overcome.
Well, and that's especially a really important role for the campaign manager, right? Because whereas you may bring in a general consultant or something like that to know the really nailed down systems and processes and having decades of experience running campaigns, the campaign manager and the field teams especially, they've got to know the people. They have to know the area. And if you're coming in from out of area, then you're not going to know that. Even if you're coming from across town, I mean, here in North Texas, Dallas versus Fort Worth, where I live, there's a big difference in culture. And if you are coming in from San Antonio or Austin or out of state, you may not appreciate the differences there, and that may lead you to not be as effective. So I think that for people that are listening that want to be campaign managers, it's critical that you know that area well, that you dive in. And if you're coming in from out of state, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but you got to be able to quickly get acclimated to that place and know the people like the back of your hand. It's not good enough just to know the fundamentals of how a campaign's supposed to operate in theory. You got to know the ground.
Indeed. And there's many ways to do that, but really the best thing is to live and work and engage with the people. And it's little things from knowing which football teams they pull for. In South Carolina, we don't have an NFL team, so college football is life. So just knowing, or knowing who the local football heroes are, so you can chat with them about it, knowing what they care about. One of the things that I always thought was the funniest when I was working in the office in Columbia was how upset people get when the Army Corps of Engineers drains the lake. And just little things like that you can connect with them on and find the big issues for them. Because a lot of times, especially in state elections and local elections, people don't care, what your politician thinks should happen at the UN or on the national level. They don't care about even maybe what's happening in Columbia or another part of the state. They care about the issues that affect them. So you can be pro Second Amendment, pro life, everything that, say a conservative district wants to hear. But if you don't know how to address the specific issues that are going on in that area, you're not going to connect with them. And so that really is the key to understanding your base.
Well, and I actually just found out a good example of that about half an hour ago from a friend of mine. So there's a state rep here in Texas that I've done a lot of work for in the past, and he has a large Indian American community in his district. And one of the things that the Indian culture has a lot of special holidays, and in Texas we regulate heavily when you can fire fireworks. And so they wanted to be able to fire fireworks on their Indian Independence Day. But they were not allowed to, and that led to some frustration with local police. And so this friend of mine, he actually sponsored a bill to basically allow for them to be able to fire off fireworks on their Independence Day. And he wouldn't have known that had he not been deeply connected in those communities that he represented, and even before becoming the representative. But as a result, the love that community has for him is absolutely incredible. And they've been a huge part of helping reelect him for this last cycle in a very competitive primary. But if you don't know the ground as a candidate or a campaign manager, there's very few things that substitute for that, because people can tell, when they're getting to know you and you're trying to get their vote, it's much more important that they like you than they agree with everything you have to say. And that's something a lot of conservatives lose sight of. And we try to, we always talk a lot about issues and policies, and those are important. But when it comes to getting the vote, it's critical that they like you as a person. And the campaign manager, because they're often interface with the people in a very large way, it's critical that they like the campaign manager as well. And having that kind of ground knowledge is very, very important to establishing that.
Yes, indeed. And, often you as the campaign manager are the face to the district, especially if you're in a period where your candidate is perhaps as a full-time job. So maybe during the workday, you're the person that they see. You're the one that's calling up local businesses. You're the one that's setting up events. And so having that ability to relate to them, you can't substitute for it. So
now, one of the things that kind of teeing off that, the candidate having absolute confidence that their reputation of being well taken care of by the campaign manager is really, really important. And so you had a long time of being able to build that confidence with Bryant, working in his office and getting to know him through volunteering. Is that kind of how you were able to build that through time to help him be comfortable with you being his head guy? Or how'd that go?
Yes, that was part of it. Part of it is honestly just enthusiasm. Something that, I worked for him for 4 years at the State House, and there were several other pages that came and went and stuff, but I think he could tell that I was the one that really cared. I was the one that really wanted to see stuff done in the district. I remember there was one time when, and I was at ROTC at the time, so military issues were very important to me, and there came up a gentleman who was big in the VFW, approached our office and said that there was a lot of abuse going on in the VA where people were getting benefits for they're claiming VA benefits that they didn't earn, especially as like POWs, because people were in South Carolina. You get a lot of tax breaks. You get many benefits if you were a POW, if you served our nation and were a POW, just as a way to say thank you for enduring and for surviving and coming back to us. So
absolutely.
So he contacted our office, and usually it's okay, yep, we'll file that away. We'll, even if it's super important, we'll start writing a bill. Anyway, Senator Bryant handed that to me, and I went home that weekend to Anderson, and I met with the guy, and I talked with him, and then I set up opportunities for Senator Bryant to talk at local VFW stations and American Legion stations and that sort of stuff. And I think that was kind of the point. I think that was my junior year when he realized that I was somebody who engaged. I was someone who really cared about the issues, cared about engaging with people, and was willing to go the extra mile, because I was only paid when I was in Columbia. I wasn't paid to go home and meet with people and talk with people and that sort of stuff. So I think it was just showing that enthusiasm, and that really kind of sets you aside, the ability and the willingness to go the extra mile. Candidates really, really care, and that's something that, especially because I've been very involved in politics, and I had friends in the military that were as well. Some of our other friends that would hear our conversations that maybe weren't as involved would say, like, wow, like, is your family really rich? How do you know all these politicians? How are you, hooked into all this stuff? And the answer is, my family was not rich. My family had nothing. In fact, my dad kind of changed careers later on and became a pastor. And so he quit his job, and he made $9,000 a year for 2 years while he was going through seminary. But during that time, like, we had feet and we had hands, we had smiles. So we would go to help out our friends who were running campaigns, and we just showed up. And especially for people who maybe you don't want to run campaigns, or maybe you're not sure and you just want to know about it. Like, the best advice that I can give is just show up, be enthusiastic. And, soon enough, if you do a good job, people will call you back, even if it's just to volunteer. And then if you show consistency, if you show consistent enthusiasm and a will to work and a will to care about the issues, and you're polite and respectful and on top of it, I mean, people want to hire those sorts of people. And that's not just for politics. That's for business. That's for anything. If you can develop that sort of personality, and it just takes 5% more effort, but just showing up and being there and having a smile on will get you really far in this world, but especially in politics, where that is so key, and especially having a presence in a district is so important. Politicians, especially that are looking to hire people, they want to see people that are enthusiastic and that are engaged and are involved.
Yeah, loyalty, enthusiasm, and work ethic are things that I, as a boss or candidate, cannot teach you. You've either got them or you don't. Everything else, as far as the technical side of running a campaign, all the things that Bryant taught you during that first campaign, those are learned assets. Those are things that I can invest in you. But the other three, you've either got it or you don't. And when you're willing to show up and do the kind of work and go those extra miles that you proved you would do, man, that's absolutely of incalculable value to anybody. And you're right. That's what I preach to folks who are coming up in politics and want to have jobs. Like, go volunteer. Go take out the trash. If they won't give you a job, go knock on doors. Volunteer, find any way to help possible. And just by continuing to show up, you're going to prove yourself to be one of a very small group of dedicated people, and that's going to open doors for you. There's just no way it can do anything else.
Yeah, there's no substitute for that. And, with any job, with any business, with any sort of profession, there's got to be a period where you have to pay your dues. When I was in the military, I was the guy that was on watch at midnight and on the weekends, and you have colors duty at random times and random out, and that's just what you do when you're the low guy on the totem pole, and that's not a bad thing. No, because what happens when you're on watch at midnight is you see how things work. When you're the person going door to door, and when you're the person that's volunteering at the weird hours and the weird events, you see how the process works. And I mean, I have a political science degree, but I took more classes on politics of the European Union than I ever did on local campaign management. Right. Yeah. And for people that do want to get a degree to go into this, I always say the best degree you can get is like a communications degree. Mm-hmm. A political science degree is great if you eventually, want to be like maybe a congressman or something. But it's good in that it helps you develop your worldview. You understand things that go on every day, especially in the news and stuff that most people don't even have a concept. They can't even begin to form a concept of what's going on. So it's good. It's useful. Don't get me wrong. But being able to communicate with people that's the bottom line. And that's as an individual, if you're willing to go out and do that on behalf of somebody for free, that's going to pay off in the long run. And even if you're like, you know what, I hate this, I don't want to do this, I'm just going to be faithful for the rest of this campaign and then I'm out. Even that will earn you respect of people that are in, potentially later on position to help you out, even if it's just, one day you have an issue. I remember that when I got out of the military, I was having an issue with the VA, and it was a simple call to the congressman's office and somebody who I had volunteered for years, and literally within a day the problem was solved. And so you're making an investment one way or another in your own future. So whether it's in a job or whether it's just in the ability to get things done and to have people that are in positions to make decisions that are in favor of you, I mean, either way, it's not a waste of time.
Well, and there's a lot of value in remembering and even going back to those dues paying activities, right? I recently was helping out with a petition project down in the Houston area, and we were helping kill a ton of new debt the county was trying to pass. $57 million they were trying to add without letting the voters cast a ballot on the subject. And so we were down there helping out with that. And I tell you what, I spent about a week walking about 9 miles a day, knocking doors and getting signatures myself. Now, that's not something that I particularly enjoy, but I'll tell you what, there was nothing that made me feel more in tune and helped me learn more about how that project should run, ways to be more efficient with it, and better ways to do it in the future than that experience. And I didn't want to do it. It kind of sucked, but we got it done, and I learned so much. And it's really good. I like to try to get back into the field, every now and then during a campaign cycle, whether it's last year being in South Carolina knocking doors for Ted Cruz during the Senate camp or the presidential primary or anything else. That's just a very, very valuable experience to keep in touch with.
It is, and there's a key balance, though, to that. And because, like you said, it's very rewarding getting out there doing that sort of stuff. It makes you feel accomplished. You could say, wow, I spoke to 100 people today, or I not this much off. So just a caution that I'll throw in there for people that are looking to manage campaigns. And this is good advice for whether you're going to be in business or whatever, but don't get distracted by the little things. I can't tell you how many times I've learned the lesson the hard way where I'll get focused on knocking out all these details, and then I spend all day doing that, and I come back and I've missed 30 emails that I need to do. So that balance is a key thing to find, because like you said, it's very rewarding. It gets you in tune, so you have to do that. You absolutely have to get out there and do that. At the same time, you find the balance, and that's where bringing up the next generation, the people that are going to take your place eventually, is important, because what you need to do is you need to be immediately thinking who's going to replace you and who's going to be the person that's going to take over for this when I'm going on to the bigger and better things. And at the same time, just for efficiency's sake, it's important that you know what you're good at and where your time is best used. For example, there's some things like I can do a lot of campaign stuff. I do not touch money. I do not do accounting. It would take me 4 times as long, and I would do half
yep.
if we just pay an accountant to do it. So that's just one thing. So finding things like that where you can, pay somebody who can do it better and more efficiently, and then you spend your time doing, whatever. And that's as a candidate. That is as a campaign manager or a volunteer, whatever that is. Work where you're most efficient. Now, you have to be well-rounded. You have to understand what everybody's doing, because if you say, well, my time can never be best used by knocking on doors, but if you don't understand what knocking on doors is like, then you're really not going to understand what your volunteers are doing. You're not going to understand what your candidate is doing. You're not going to understand that, hey, like the advice that I always give anybody who's in any sort of leadership position is make sure your people never go hungry. Always have bottles of water, snacks, take them out to eat. Make sure they feel appreciated, because you are bringing up the people that will replace you, and you don't want to burn them out immediately by asking too much of them. So that's just another little thing. I know that's kind of a little off track, but take care of your people and make sure that they're excited and they stay motivated, because they are going to be most efficient that way. And then you are bringing them up to either replace you or to go on and to bring your message and to share your worldview with another campaign. So in either case, you're going to get paid back in dividends in the long term. But yeah, focus on where you're best employed, and then employ good people to help fill your gaps, but then take care of those people. Don't just be like, you know what, they're the door-to-door knockers, so I'm just going to let them do their thing, and when they get tired, I'm sure they'll take a break. Because if they're as hard as you, they're probably not going to take a break. So sometimes you have to say, okay, everybody stop, drink some bottles of water, have some snacks, Go to the restroom. Okay, now let's go take on the next one.
Well, I think that's where, especially your military background and training, gives you a great understanding of that, right? Because there's a level of detachment that as you rise in leadership ranks that you have to have towards the activities that are, frankly, I think a lot of the ones that you enjoy the most, right? The guy that's commanding the helicopter squadron is not going to have as much time on the stick as the guy as you were when you were there in the cockpit, but he has to detach himself from that, let you do your job, and be able to take care of the important tasks that he is given that nobody else can do. As a campaign manager, you have to realize that you has to be a balance between those frontline activities and the management activities that, frankly, suck a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And as you're, yes, you need to go get your time block walking doors, even as a campaign manager or making phone calls. But I've seen some people that fall too far into that side, where they'll start shirking the responsibilities that are theirs and theirs alone, and they'll start doing the more fun, more immediate gratification tasks of knocking the doors or stuffing envelopes, those kind of things. And there's truly a balance there that you have to find. It's different in every campaign and different at different moments within that campaign, but you have to be constantly tuning yourself into that. And I really like what you said about taking care of your people, because you're never going to have enough volunteer hours, enough money, or enough time. But the good thing is that money and volunteer hours are potentially renewable, right? But the difference is you can lose that. Whereas time is constant, your volunteers, you can get more or you can lose ones. And how you take care of them is going to have a great deal to do with, like you said, not only the future generation coming up, but with how successful your immediate campaign is going to be. And I've seen campaigns that have literally churned through people like they're a sweatshop, volunteers and staff, and they've literally turned off. There's a statewide campaign a couple years ago that they just churned through these people, and they didn't treat them right. There were a lot of people that I thought had a lot of potential for being long-term, political operatives that are never going to touch politics again because they just had such a bad experience and got beat up so bad in this campaign. And I think that does an incredible disservice to the movement as a whole, because it kills that bench of the next generation and is going to put us in a harder position years from now.
Exactly. And anything that we do, whether we understand or not, is going to either help or hurt our worldview. And so if you want to propagate your worldview long term, if you want to get people excited about it, whether that's filming movies, working in business, working in politics, you have to keep them excited. You have to give them motivation. You have to give them a reason to come back. Otherwise, it's going to die with you. And at that case, at that point, you failed your worldview. You failed the mission. Even if you worked your whole life and slaved away, you failed the mission. You haven't continued this idea, this principle that you're fighting for, because you basically turned off the next generation from it, even if your intentions were perfectly sound.
You are absolutely right. Well, a couple of years ago, when Ted Cruz was running for Senate, he had offered me a job, and I wanted to take it, but where I was at with my current employer, I just couldn't leave. Out of loyalty, my boss, I just couldn't leave him where I was at. And one of the pieces that advice that Ted gave me was, it's like, Raz, one of the things that I recommend you always be doing is anytime you're in a position, be helping train your replacements, just like you mentioned a few minutes ago, Zan. And the idea there was, and Ted applied this when he was working in the Attorney General's office here in Texas, and immediately started investing in and helping train the couple guys that were potential replacements for him if he ever moved on, because he saw it as a duty to his employer to make sure that if he gets hit by a bus or gets a bigger opportunity, something he has to go do, that his boss is not going to be left in the lurch. And that's something I've tried to take to heart in the past as far as investing in people, both specific replacements to me, but as well as the folks that are coming up in lower positions. But I think a lot in politics that there's some ego that gets involved. And in a lot of cases, we like to think that we know the special sauce and we're the best that's going to be at our job. But there's this little bit that sometimes can be threatened by some of these folks that are coming up. And so sometimes people fail because of ego to invest as heavily as they could in these future generations of political operatives. And if your motivation is truly to help the movement, to champion conservative principles and policies, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. And it's tragic, it's human, but we have to be consistently working to help stamp that out. I think it's absolutely critical to the movement as a whole.
Exactly, and you could even do it for selfish reasons. I mean, I remember, especially in flight school, the better instructors, they'd always talk to us about why they cared and why they cared that we were good pilots and why we didn't cut corners and why we did things efficiently and such, because they said, you know what, you're in flight school now, but in 2 years, you and I are both going to be out in the fleet, and we'll be in Iraq or we'll be in Somalia and we'll be flying along. And it's not, when say I'm flying along and then I get wounded, all right, you're my 2P, you're now flying the helicopter. My life is in your hands in combat. I want to make sure you didn't cut corners in flight school. I want to make sure that I took all the time in flight school that I could to give you good habits so that you do your emergency procedures right, so that you know how to use your weapons. And it's the same way in politics. I mean, let's look at this selfishly. Politicians out there, if you are not training up your campaign managers and the people that are the excited volunteers, then you say when you get senior leadership in the Senate, those people are going to be running for those new Senate seats, and they're going to be junior guys in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. So you're going to need backup. One day you're going to need somebody to vote for you. And in the Senate, you're going to need a White House chief of staff. You're going to need somebody that has your vision, that has your worldview, that's excited, that's motivated, that has all of your knowledge and your specific skills and your value system. So it's not just do it for the vision, do it for the cause, do it for yourself, do it because you want to have somebody that's going to have your back long term, whether that's in the Senate, whether that's if these people are going to one day be in business, they're going to be these people that are 15, 20 years younger than you that are working for you. One day, even if you're 35 and they're 20, well, guess what? One day you're going to be 65 and they're going to be 50 and they're going to be the CEOs of companies and they're going to be legislators. And these are the excited, motivated, hardworking people that you want emulating you and honestly liking you long term.
Yeah, you have no idea how those relationships and how you investing in people is going to pay out in the long run. I mean, you didn't know, there's no way to know, 8 years ago when you were working with Bryant that, Nikki was going to get pushed to the UN and that there's going to be a vacancy. He's end up the LG, right? There's no way to know that. I mean, there's things happen that way. And that's why it's important, whether it's, for the partially selfish motives or just out of, the being, purely gracious, that you treat people right. You do the right thing and work hard, because you never know how God's going to use those people and those events to make you more useful to him and to the country down the line.
Yes, indeed.
So talk some more about, with those couple campaigns you've been on, you've obviously probably faced some great things that happened as well as some bad things. What are some of the struggles that you've had and some of the difficult situations you've had to work through there on the ground?
One of the most frustrating things is that I think, especially for people that are honest and upright, they assume other people are going to be the same. And especially on our last campaign, we had some real shockers because we assumed that we're playing everything clean, that they were going to play everything clean. And so it's something my mom always used to say, but she said, believe the best and prepare for the worst.
Yep. Good advice.
Things like we had in this last campaign, the opposition, not directly from their campaign, but through their consultant, basically created fake liberal organizations that thanked Senator Bryant for some of the what they perceived as like pro-liberal stuff he did, and they made fake conservative organizations that sent out mailers attacking him for being liberal. And so it was this weird, like none of the stuff is even true, but they sent it out a week before the election, and there's no way we could have really counter it at that point.
There's no response time there.
Right, and so obviously we just had to trust that the strength of his character would prevail, and it did. But we're not going in blind to this time. We're the same person is in the race for this Senate seat, so we're going to be prepared for that. We know that they're going to play dirty, even if they smile and are nice and everybody loves them. We know that they will give their tacit assent to their consultants to play dirty. And so, the whole wise as serpents, innocent as doves thing is really key. Mm-hmm. And just going in with your eyes open, going in assuming that everybody is going to play dirty. So be cautious, be careful. Don't give them any legitimate reasons to attack you. And then when they have fake ones, let your strength of character be so pronounced throughout the entire campaign that people are going to just dismiss it as ridiculous political stuff. So that was one of the biggest struggles I had, but both within the campaign and personally, just understanding why is this happening? Why is the character of this man that I admire and I've worked for so long being attacked on really ridiculous, fraudulent stuff? That was hard, and that's something you have to get used to. I mean, you saw this in the Ted Cruz campaign, I'm sure, the whole Ryan thing.
Yeah, there's plenty of that in the South Carolina race when we were down there. That was about the worst for us.
I tell you, Senator Bryant endorsed Senator Cruz and spoke before him at several events. And so what happened was they actually created a Facebook page, and it was called, they were trying to build on the pro-Trump hype, and the page was called Lion Ted's Best Friend. And talk about how Kevin Bryant was Lion Ted's best friend and this sort of stuff. The thing that they didn't understand is that the conservatives were like, all right, like if this guy's Ted Cruz's best friend, this is awesome. But they were trying to capitalize on the whole drain the swamp, and that was hard because this was something I hadn't really dealt with before. But in the age of drain the swamp and get rid of the incumbents, we're dealing with a 12-year incumbent here. He's
right.
Running for his fourth term and trying to convince people that he's not the establishment, which is the truth. I mean, Senator Bryant was fighting people left and right all the way through. He formed what they called the William Wallace Caucus.
Nice.
And because they just end up getting crucified all the time for their standpoints, for their viewpoints. But he's not the establishment. So it was trying to convince somebody who's been there for 12 years, because he has a base that doesn't like the establishment in Columbia, trying to convince people that he's still not part of them. So that was a unique thing, which thankfully I'm not really dealing with in this current campaign because we have somebody who's running for office for the first time. So that's something at least they can't throw at him this time. But that was really frustrating, and it was really hard, and it was trying to find a way to show people that, listen, this guy has been fighting an uphill battle for 12 years, and he's still trying to represent you. He's not part of the swamp that needs to be drained.
Well, as you know from having run these campaigns during presidential cycles for a while, there are just special factors that come into play when you're talking about when you have no control at the top of the ticket that you never see in those off-year races or these down ballot races. And in Texas, one of the interesting things, we had no idea how is Trump and Ted being at the top of the ticket, how is that going to play out? Is it going to be really anti-incumbent, or because we in Texas have got to the point where a lot of the guys that I've worked with the last couple of years that we've got in that were the insurgents, I mean, they're now incumbents, and they're doing the same thing as your old boss as far as fighting back against that establishment and the more moderate Republicans and liberal ones. But they have to differentiate because now they can't say, hey, I'm running against the incumbent. They are the incumbent. And it was really a question of how, what's the bent going to be? Are these folks all going to show up and not knowing who the good guys and bad guys are down ballot? Are they going to kick out our old guys, the good guys? And the interesting thing was in Texas, we had incredibly low turnover as far as incumbents losing. Like there were more incumbents that won in the primary this last year than have in any of the past 4 or 5 elections. And the reason was everybody showed up to vote for top of the ticket and just voted the names they knew down ballot. And so there's incredibly low turnover, which is not at all what most people expected, because they figured, hey, we got Trump and Ted, both anti-establishment guys, largely anti-incumbent, and so that's going to translate down ballot. But the increase in turnout was so high that it watered down any of that effect down ballot. And so your ability to anticipate some of those things, that's where kind of the sorcery side of campaign management comes in, because very few people did. But you got to pay attention.
And you have variances even within region. I mean, look at Carolina. We had a massive turnover rate. In the upstate area of South Carolina, of the 5 sitting senators, 3 of them lost. One of them won runoff, and Senator Bryant, who I was working for, won 51 to 49%. So, in that same year, there was a slaughter amongst the. I think there was a total of 8 senators that were incumbents lost, and we only have 46 in our Senate. So, that was a massive difference. So, now it may be because Ted was from Texas and a lot of people were more comfortable with him, being more being in position, that sort of stuff. And I think South Carolina and Texas are different political climates. In South Carolina, you have basically three parties in the state Senate. You have the Democrats, the Republicans who used to be Democrats, and then like the conservative Republicans. So that a lot of times gets convoluted because you'll see Republicans passing and even leading very liberal measures, but it's because it's the old former Democrat, Southern Democrat, Dixiecrat crowd that are pushing that,
right?
Not the Tea Party guys. So
that is interesting. It's just fascinating, those differences and how you have those variables at play in different elections that some of which you can anticipate, right? And some of which you can't. And it has huge impacts as far as how you run a campaign. For example, I'm huge on ground game. I'm all about knocking doors, and that's one of the things that I think nearly every campaign should do more of as far as individual direct voter contact. But in this last election here in Texas, it turned out that because of how the impact at the top of the ticket, more than any presidential in recent history, that TV and radio and mass media stuff actually would have probably been somewhere, if I could go back, I would recommend more money to go into. And I know a number of consultants here in state would. And that's something that no other election in recent history has had that big of an impact. But in this one, it did. And some people saw that. I didn't. But you have to be very attuned in to know how to allocate those resources depending on what's happening in the air and on the ground.
You really do. And I mean, I got to see some of the insides of the Cruz campaign here in South Carolina, as I had a lot of friends that were involved in it. And Senator Bryant was working with the Cruz campaign. But I mean, Ted Cruz had, in my opinion, the greatest ground game I've ever seen, especially for a national scale election.
Hands down.
It was impeccable. And yet Donald Trump, who had almost zero ground game, won, because it was the age of Twitter and, the most recent headline and that sort of stuff. So, but I think for local elections, you're right. Ground game is still going to be much more effective. But when it comes to the national scale, sometimes there's just factors that, you can't account for whatsoever.
Well, in this case, there's a lot of disagreement even now among folks as far as saying, has it changed? Is it all going to be the mass media side now? And I think that we saw a somewhat special case here, right? There was an unprecedented amount of free and earned media that Trump got, and that was a huge factor that nobody has ever gotten that kind of attention. And so I think it's while he may running for re-election stuff may be a factor there as well. I don't think. I mean, I'll preach it till the day I die. There's like the day of block walking, that day of voter contact, even on the state and national level. I still believe that's an incredibly important tool. The Trump campaign and the RNC did a ton of that in the general. And in spite of a lot of the credit towards the mass media side, I think that had a big impact, especially in some of these close states where that Trump got the winning margin in. I think that those, especially looking back at what I know of the ground game that the RNC had on the ground, I'm convinced that actually had a big role in making sure that Trump actually won this thing, because it was extensive. It didn't get a whole lot of press, but they put a ton of work into that, and I believe it had a critical role.
And something that's interesting and kind of changing in this new world of politics is that this country and even local communities are becoming more and more polarized. People either identify as, look at Donald Trump's percentage numbers. Some polls have him as much as 91% approval amongst Republicans and as low as 6% approval amongst Democrats. Like, we're becoming more and more polarized. So in many cases, it's not a factor of persuading people or convincing people. It's just getting the people who already agree with you out to vote.
Yes.
And so that is massive. And that's where your ground game comes in, because they have a personal contact and they now feel a responsibility to you if they've told you they'd vote for you. And so that's honestly, especially in Senator Bryant's last campaign, that's what we focused on heavily. We knew that people that were gonna vote against him or for the other person weren't gonna switch sides. There was no amount of talking that we could do that we could convince them otherwise. So what we focused on was get our people out to vote. And that's where we're still putting a heavy emphasis, although there's actually 7 candidates in this current Senate race. So there is people legitimately do want to figure out who they're going to vote for. But in the last 2 weeks, people have mostly made up their minds. We are going to be out there just finding our people, the people that agree with us, those hardcore conservatives, the people that want to see intelligent, tactical, strategic use of conservative principles in the State House. We're going to be getting out there, and we're going to just be reminding them that they need to go vote, because at that point, especially in the final days, a lot of times people have made up their minds. Things are polarized, and especially in general elections, less so for primaries probably, but especially these days in general elections, just getting your people out to vote is so key.
Well, and generally speaking, I break down getting a vote into 3 phases, right? You got identification, persuasion, and turnout, or get out the vote. And what I've seen is in a lot of cases, when you've got an incumbent or when you have a lot of media attention on a race, your persuasion window, just like you talked about, that shrinks a lot as far as there are very few persuadable people. A lot of it comes in during the identification phase and get out the vote. So it kind of swings out more to the edges. And in your ID phase, you put more work in there to find those people, the issues where they agree with you, the people that you believe can come to your side if they are familiar with you. The persuasion, you may work a little bit, but more and more people are falling into those. They're either going to be pretty easy for you or pretty quickly against you. And then putting so many resources. I mean, the vast majority of your campaign spending should go towards the end of your campaign, and the vast majority of your campaign spending should go to contacting voters. And so if you're doing those things, then you're going to have a very, very aggressive you'll get out the vote campaign. But what a lot of people don't see is that if you're not training up folks during the identification and persuasion phase, you're not going to be able to have the resources and the knowledge and the volunteers to execute a really, really good get out the vote campaign. I mean, previously that's your training ground, ID and persuasion, and then you're really doing a lot of that just so you can execute a rock star get out the vote operation.
Yeah, and one thing that we've actually noticed trying to get volunteers recently is in many cases, people are getting, especially because of everything on social media, the venom and viciousness of modern politics, in some ways it's been harder to get people involved because they say, I just don't want to deal with it. I just don't want to get involved in this cat fight. I don't want to see all the nasty posts on Facebook, so I'm just going to watch, cat videos and posting. And I'm not going to bother with politics. So that's actually something we struggle with because of the venom. A lot of people that are strong conservatives are saying, I don't want the Republican label. I don't want to be called a racist. I don't want to be called I don't want to be called a hateful person, or I don't want people to assume that I hate gay people or minorities or something, so that they won't come out and put on the Republican tag. And that's something we've struggled with as well, where people say, listen, we'll support you, just don't tell anybody we are.
Well, and that's got to be especially hard in y'all's current special elect situation, because typically we have a break between elections, right? And I mean, I know that after any given election, I am wrung out. I'm very, very, my personal goal every year since I first got involved is I want on election night, between when the polls close and early voting comes in, I want to be able to look in the mirror and know that I left it all on the field. And that means that for weeks afterwards, I'm wrung out. I don't want to talk about politics. I go on vacation. I don't want to see any political stuff on my Facebook. I just check out. And it takes a while to get back in. I think I'll probably come back quicker than others because it's like a drug you can't quit. But when it comes to most people, especially after such a divisive election as 2016 was, the whole 2-year finagle, people want to break. And so you guys are in a very, very difficult position as far as being hit by that in a big way.
Yeah, and so, it's going to be a matter of, like I said, it's going to be a matter of convincing people it's still important and that they still need to get out there and vote. And there's certain things you can do to mitigate that. Like I said, taking care of your volunteers, and talking on the personality thing. I think you've mentioned this before, talking about how just the character of the person, the candidate matters. And, we spoke earlier about the candidate, how the campaign manager, how his personality is important, but just getting out there and talking and showing that this is not the national election. This is not the cat fight. This is still important. It's still vital to the working of our state. And it's still something that people need to be involved. And when it comes to a candidate, and something I've been very blessed with both of the candidates that I've managed campaigns for, a piece of advice that I was given very early in my military career is follow a leader of strong character, because not one that's always right. And then even if your one of strong character is wrong sometimes and he's wrong, if he is actually a man of character or a woman of character, they will identify that issue. they'll rectify it, and they'll admit that they were wrong, and they'll work to fix it. And that's key in a campaign as well, not just in military or in business or anything like that. So you have to be willing to stick with somebody even if you think they're wrong for a little bit. And sometimes you have to convince voters of that. You have to say, like you were saying earlier, people are voting for personality. So, convince people that, in my case, James is a good guy, that he cares about his family, that he cares about the state, that he cares about them, and that, they may not always agree with him, but know that he'll come around and he will still always act to what he thinks is the best interest of his people and the state of South Carolina. So that's the campaign that we're going to have to run over the next 6 weeks, is convincing people that it's still important, that we still need men of character in the office, and they can't just give up and they can't just check out. And even if they don't agree with him on everything, convince him that he has that strong character that should be supported, whether he's maybe 100% with them on every issue or not.
That's the selling point that I told folks when I was doing stuff on the road for Cruz and helping out on the Super PAC side of that, the presidential primary, and coming up with his Senate reelect, is knowing the character of the man. And I've always worked very, very hard, because I believe that the politics is really a calling that I've been, that the guys put on my heart to be involved with. The results, the people that I work for and how they act in office is a reflection of what I've been able to do, even if it's only in a small way. And so it's important to me that I work for and help people that I actually believe are going to do the right thing. And so their character counts. And working with guys like, Ted and a Matt Krause and a Connie Burton, to get folks here that are more local in Texas, it's incredible to see them and get to see them behind the scenes, because, those are people that are the same, whether they're talking to a donor that might cut them a check for a lot of money, or on TV, or in debate, or talking to a bunch of Tea Party folks. It doesn't matter who they're talking to. They're the same person. They're going to say that they're for the same things. They're going to handle things the same way. And that's that's very rare today in politics. And the kind of guys you've worked with, I know that they share those same type of attributes. And I think that this is my hope, really. It's we'll see if it plays out this way. But my hope is that as we see so much backlash against that partisanship, I'm hoping that people will come to believe that character matters again. That I can say, look, I may disagree with them on a couple issues. Maybe it's only 80% of stuff that I agree with them on, but I trust their character. I know the man. I know the woman. And I believe that they're going to do the right thing.
Yeah, and, we've seen this and even amongst conservatives, it's one of the things that I think destroys conservatives, because conservatives are so principled. I know some, we have many very strong, hardworking pro-life groups here in South Carolina, and there are some very solid conservative Republican senators that were not supporting one of the pro-life movements that they were really pushing. And they were doing it for strong political reasons, trying to work in favor of the long-term pro-life goal. And they had those organizations coming up and saying, well, you're not really a Republican. You're not really a conservative. There's no way you can be a Christian. There's no way you can care about the unborn if you're not going to vote for this. And they're saying, look at our record. Look at us. What has ever, convinced you that we don't like babies? What has ever, when have we ever betrayed you? We promise we're working for your good. We promise we're trying to win the long-term goal. But, voting for a outrageous pro-life bill that's going to get, even if it passes, gets immediately overturned in court. You then have precedent of a ruling against it for the whole country. Why would you try to fall on your sword that way? And, but those wonderful pro-life groups who I think we all support were venomous towards them. And there's a point where you just have to trust on people's character, trust their background, trust their experience, and then trust their knowledge as professionals, that they're going to be working in your best interests, whether it looks like that immediately or not.
Well, and there's really a sphere where people of principle can disagree, right? And it comes in largely on a tactical level, but there are some of those areas where you can hold a principle strong. You can be unequivocally pro-life or unequivocally pro-Second Amendment, and have disagreements on how to get to the longer term stuff. And it's important that organizations and individuals that we're careful about picking which ones to beat people with. because sometimes they deserve it. Sometimes they're losing their way a little bit and they deserve to get kicked back on the path. And in some cases where it's just a circular firing squad. And honestly, in some cases, it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. And that's where prudence and judgment play a heavy role, which sadly there's not enough of either in politics today. Well, Zan, I'll tell you what, I thank you so much for your time. Do you have any kind of closing advice for folks that are looking to run for office or wanting to get involved in campaigns and politics as far as more volunteering or a job?
I think we've covered it today. Know your district, take care of your people, have those principles, be wise as serpents, innocent as doves, and just be enthusiastic, be involved, care. And, the right people will take notice, whether that's voters, whether that's your boss, whether that's, your fellow politicians or your fellow candidates. People will notice if you're enthusiastic, if you care, and if you understand the issues facing your specific area.
Well, Zan, I appreciate it. Thank you for service to our country in the Navy and for all the great work you're doing there in South Carolina. I'm really excited to see what you guys are able to do in James' campaign down there and looking for a win here in a couple of weeks. So thank you for your time. We'll put your information in the show notes and hope people can reach out to you if they got any questions. And I'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, man. Have a good one. God bless.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Remember to check out campaignsidekick.vote for information on how they can help your campaign win on the ground. Check out the contact information of Zan's in the contact or in the show notes, and we'll be looking to talk to you guys again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.